We look at how ransomware operators are using leak portals to add additional pressure for companies to pay the ransom.
So, Jaime, I heard you have some original research about ransomware operators who not only encrypt data, but also will threaten to release it if a ransom isn't paid. So what can you tell us?
That's right. So my team and I have been looking at, different threat actors that leverage ransomware, and this new trend that started late last year, where, as you described, ransomware operators, on top of encrypting your data and asking for a ransom, if you don't pay the ransom, they are also going to publish your files on the dark web. So the cool thing about this is we were able to identify more than 10 dark web onion sites where the operators are just listing every victim, the industry, so you can get a lot of data about the type of companies that they are compromising, right? So, the type of data that we have seen there that they are leaking are things like financial data, customer information. We have even seen passports and background checks, social security numbers. So it's a lot of information, both from companies in the US, but also in Europe. And the important thing about Europe is, this adds an extra amount of pressure on these companies to pay the ransom, because if that data ends up in the dark web, they can get fines from GDPR, right? So, as you know, in Europe, like they are pretty good at finding companies lately in terms of if you have a security breach and that type of data from your customers ends up being publicly available, right? So we have also seen intellectual property, not just from those companies, but it's also important to look at, we have seen information from Fortune 500 companies because those third parties were their customers, right? So when you're a big enterprise, even if you have, enough security to make sure that this is not happening to you, you need to look at who your vendors are, who your third parties are, because your data can end up, being publicly available because a breach on one of those third party companies, right? Lately, you have probably seen very high profile companies, right? We have seen Xerox, LG, Canon that were targeted by Maze. You have seen Garmin, actually, a pretty big company that was targeted recently by one of these, ransomware gangs. And one of the interesting things about Garmin, it looks like they paid a ransom. So it's one of the big companies that actually decided to pay that ransom. So there is a possibility that one of the reasons why they paid the ransom was because of this situation where these threat actors were actually not only not giving them the key, but they were going to publish the information. In terms of the study that we have made, how are these ransomware threat actors actually compromising those networks? We have seen, 90% of the times it's like three threat vectors, right? One is spear phishing. I mean, we are tired of telling the same story, right? Like I'm not gonna repeat that, but the other two are actually pretty important, right? The main one is remote desktop brute forcing and remote desktop, using credentials that they have stolen from third parties, right? So if you reuse your credentials in another site and those credentials are compromised, these companies, these threat actors are going to try to use those credentials. And if you have exposed remote desktop, servers, that's one of the main threat vectors that they are using. And the second one that is very important is lately there has been many vulnerabilities in F5, Citrix, Fortinet, Pulse Secure, all these VPNs and remote access tools. All these ransomware gangs have been exploiting those vulnerabilities really badly. So especially Rebel and Doppelpaymer and others, Maze is one of the other groups that have been hitting every single site on the internet that had these devices exposed, and that's how they gain access to those networks. So, three things you need to pay attention. offline backups. You need to do that. You need to do this today, right? Even if you have a good, backup policy, if those backups are available, somehow they are online backups, meaning that if threat actors get access to your environment and they are able to access those backups, the first thing they're gonna do is remove those backups. So try to at least for your main databases and services, try to make sure that you have those offline backups that can be accessed. Obviously, two-factor authentication, some of the threat vectors that I mentioned, especially remote desktop and VPN exploitation, two-factor authentication can actually mitigate some of those things. Even if they get access to a VPN, if you have two-factor authentication, some of that lateral movement can be prevented by that. And obviously, if you haven't started yet, try to move to that zero trust architecture where you're obviously going to mitigate a lot of these things, because even if threat actors gain access to your network, they're going to have a hard time moving laterally and accessing that confidential data that can be exploited in this scheme.
Well, those are great recommendations. I don't think I have anything else. Mike, you got anything?
No, just it's interesting that they're adding this additional leverage, right? So they're maybe not getting payment just with the threat of, or just to get the encryption key, but now we're going to publish it, right? So just kind of upping the ante, right, to ensure that they're getting their payment. So definitely interesting, kind of again evolution in this.
Yeah, and the one thing I forgot to mention, we also saw one of these threat actors experimenting with new schemes. One of them actually experimented with actioning the files, so people could, bid for those files in advance.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so we see how they get very creative and they keep adding new features that add more pressure for those companies to pay the ransom.